Alright, before we even begin this video, let me just say that this video is probably going to be all over the place. The script for this video was written around the time when SS, or the new chapters of SS had just released, and it was never really finished, so the me of this past week, I've had to go back, skim through SS, and kind of finish the script. I do at some point just want to sit down and genuinely just reread through the entirety of SS because my memory has been all over the place. So the script is a couple months old, not to mention that this is my first video back, so I'm trying to get back into the swing of things. I still think that regardless, it's an enjoyable video, so I hope you guys do enjoy this. Give me just a little bit of time to get back into the swing of things, and I'm sorry that this video is coming out so late. Adachi Atsuka has always been a character in Adachi and Shimamura that has had this sort of mysterious cold aura surrounding her. We know that she's Adachi's mother who actively seems to neglect and even dislikes her daughter for reasons unbeknownst to us. However, that was the extent of her character that we knew. That was until the newest chapters of Adachi and Shimamura SS were released, which contained quite the information dump, which will give us a better idea of Adachi Atsuka's character and developments. Now, before we talk about SS, let's talk a little bit more about Atsuka's character herself. Adachi Atsuka is, without a doubt, an interesting character that I think shapes the format of Adachi and Shimamura sort of differently. Throughout the entirety of Adachi and Shimamura, Atsuka has always been painted in a sort of villainous light. We never really knew anything about her, besides the fact that she hadn't been there all too often for her daughter, and that their connection with each other was barely even holding on. This was enough for a lot of us to immediately write off Atsuka's character, since the vast majority of us believed that at the time, that was the extent of her character, and we wouldn't learn anything more about her. So without a doubt, Atsuka was a disliked character solely because of the fact that we didn't know why she did the things that she did, and we weren't informed that later on we would be getting explanations. What I think is so interesting is the fact that in the newest SS chapters, Iruma decides to dictate the story from the perspective of Atsuka, and it's quite a different experience from what we're normally used to. In the Adachi and Shimamura SS chapter titled "And Then," we follow Atsuka as she's spending the night with the Shimamuras in preparation of sending Adachi and Shimamura off to live together. And I probably should have mentioned that the timeline we're in is quite a ways into the future of Adachi and Shimamura. In short, this whole trip is one big reality check for Atsuka. I think that at this point in the story, Atsuka has just reached a state of pure guilt that's been building up over the years. From the introduction sentence of this chapter to the demeanor in which Atsuka displays herself, it's clear that she is nothing more than a broken woman. And we actually get explanations for why Atsuka is like this. An explanation that gives meaning to the actions that she's done so far. Within this chapter, towards the middle/nearish end, we learn that Atsuka was married. She even had a child, which is, as we know, Adachi. And then she got divorced. But furthering that, we also learn that the marriage was something that Atsuka never wanted. It was a marriage without love. When asked why she even got married, the reason she felt to get married was because she believed that it was expected of her. We can assume that having a child was something that Atsuka never wanted herself either. This marriage that Atsuka forced herself into brought a lot of unhappiness and very likely depression. With nothing left, no husband, no close relatives, only herself and a potentially unwanted daughter, this invoked some sort of self-hate within Atsuka. That self-hate that Atsuka had found would be something that she'd be constantly forced to acknowledge as she watched her daughter grow up and become more and more like herself. And it's primarily for this reason why Atsuka could never bring herself to approach Adachi. It's not that she didn't love her daughter, it's the fact that she didn't love herself. She didn't love who she saw in her daughter and wanted to run away from that. And in fact, did run away from that for almost the entirety of Adachi's childhood. But it's also important to mention that Atsuka doesn't do this with a clean conscience. Even in the main story, as far back as Atsuka's first encounter with Shimamura, she does show symptoms of regret/disappointment. However, she just can't bring herself to take the first step towards her daughter. And as Adachi grows older and becomes more and more akin to her mother, this proves to continuously be difficult for Atsuka. She's stuck in a loop where she's just completely powerless against her daughter, against herself, and against everything. The parts of her daughter that she should have seen first as her mother, she'd only seen for the first time in SS. In SS, she sees Adachi smiling for the first time ever, and she realizes that she knows nothing of her daughter. For a very long time, Atsuka had been lowering Adachi's character to the same standards as her own, believing that they are one and the same, when in reality, this is just not true at all. That is also something that Atsuka herself learns. She never knew the first thing about her daughter and never tried to learn, as she was always under the assumption that her daughter was just a reflection of herself. However, seeing that reflection experience things that you've never experienced shifted Atsuka's interpretation of her daughter. So much so that she believed that her daughter was an entirely different person. And after witnessing how much her daughter had changed without ever even being there for her, Atsuka finally does work up the courage to speak with her daughter, and her words are bittersweet but fitting. "Sakura, I didn't wait for her to respond, for this wasn't a conversation. It was my last will, my testament. I see so much of myself in you." The parting words from a terrible mother to the poor daughter she'd brought to this world. "Which is why I need you to promise," and her heartfelt attempt at doing something motherly for once in her life. "Don't become like me." It's not the "I love you" Adachi would have been happy to hear, and it's not the apology that realistically should have been given. It's a selfish wish from her mother to ensure that her beloved daughter doesn't go down the same route as her mother. This is one of the first times Atsuka has spoken to Adachi, not as a reflection of herself, but as her own person, and I believe that this bittersweet conclusion is better than any other ending Iruma Hitoma could have composed. I believe that Atsuka is a character that fits perfectly into this story. Adachi and Shimamura isn't a series that's lenient enough to give everyone their happy endings. We witnessed this firsthand with Tadami, the girl who had some sort of feelings for Adachi who had to give up on them. And even a future Shimamura that's forcefully stripped away from her Adachi and not reunited until death. There's numerous characters in this story that are forced to succumb to tragic fates, and Atsuka fits in perfectly with that list of characters. And although I don't think Atsuka's reasoning is necessarily justification enough for all the psychological torment that her daughter had to endure for a very long time, but I do love how this was expanded upon, and Atsuka has come face to face with that guilt and has no choice but to accept her mistakes. And regardless, Atsuka is a character that I do feel bad for. Prior to being married, even still, she'd never had the experiences of friends. False information alert, Atsuka actually did have a lot of friends in the past. All's mistaken, forgive me. Someone truthfully. It wouldn't be an overstatement to say that Atsuka is a complete failure. I know it's harsh, but Atsuka's whole existence, her whole presence, her whole life is just a complete failure. And I know that sounds extremely harsh, but there's no other way that it can be put, and I feel so bad for her. Like, at this point in Atsuka's life, she's already fairly old. She's watched her daughter completely grow up. There's not much more that will change, and this is probably how she's going to live out the rest of her days. Of course, she does have a little bit going for her. She has Shimamura Yoshika, Shimamura's mother. Shimamura's mother keeps in contact with Atsuka. She checks up on Atsuka, and I feel like Atsuka herself has learned a lot from Shimamura's mother, which I feel like is at least deserving of Atsuka, right? Having at least one person to be there for her, I feel like that's something that she at least deserves as a person. And that concludes Atsuka's story. Atsuka is just a broken woman who has been broken for a long time. She fell victim to the expectations of her family and perhaps even society as a whole, which caused her to do things that she didn't want to do. And the consequences of doing those things that she didn't want to do resulted in her ultimately living a life of complete contempt. In my eyes, Atsuka's whole character really lets the harsh nature of Adachi and Shimamura sink in. Of course, it's your cute average Yuri series between two people coming closer to each other, but with that aside, you have characters like Atsuka on the sidelines who honestly have had the worst of the worst. And it's specifically for characters like Atsuka that are the reason that I love this series. This series is so much more than just being a cute Yuri. It's the reason why I always come back to it, and why I most likely always will come back to it. And with that said, that's everything I have to say. Thank you so much for watching this video, it means so much to me. I'll see you guys in my next video.